And we're live.
Good morning, everyone, and good evening for folks from Australia who are calling in. I'm Paul Beyer from GAI Insights, and welcome to our daily Gen AI news briefing, where we discuss and rate top news items. Our team of analysts rate each article as essential, important, or optional for executives and leaders at companies. Today, our guest rater is Connor Grennan, and the briefing is sponsored by GAI Insights. Today, our discussion will be led by David. David.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I hope you're ready for a good weekend. Connor, thanks for joining us bright and early today. Looking forward to having your insights as part of the discussion. So, we have a few articles, and then we're actually going to spend a little time on December's Future of Work report that Microsoft released. We've all found some interesting insights in there, so we thought we would share those today. But we will start off with a use case. Of course, we're in the year of the use case here, seeing how generative AI is going to actually start to add some real value. So we've got Mastercard, who has announced that they built in-house a tool that will aid in fraud detection with transactions. Although in reading the article, I'll be interested to see what you guys think about them categorizing this as generative AI. So we will go to John first for this one.
Sure. Yeah, no, I would rate this thing as important and also put it in the panoply of major organizations implementing generative AI derived or generative AI tools in their core. We talked about, Walmart doing it for shopping, McDonald's doing it for ordering and franchise management. Here we have MasterCard doing it for their fraud detection, which of course is a huge part of the value they create. And so, in the article, 300% is the top end. On average, is about 20%. Your question, David, about generative AI. I believe that what they're doing is that they are predicting possible future patterns of fraud based on previous patterns. So imagine doing fraud patterns the same way you do poetry in a large language model. I think that's what they're doing. And when they see my guess would be when they see the correlation of a generated pattern in the context of fraud from a fraud base, then they're increasing the score. They give it a score, and that score will then have a different review. But again, that's guessing because the article does not go into a lot of detail. But
they're using recurrent neural networks at its heart, which is maybe considered generative AI a long time ago, but now we're kind of into the transformer space. I think it sounds like then he uses the word transformer. So maybe there's like RNN at its core, and then they're using generative AI kind of like at the top for like natural language interaction or something.
Well, I thought it was different. I thought they were training it on patterns of merchant and client behavior. Would this?
They are. Yeah, and they also say they use transformers, but they say they use recurrent neural networks. It's a little bit muddled, but yes, it's not a large language model in the normal sense. The language they're using is patterns between merchants and card use. So that's what they're looking for. That's their language.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Anyway, but I would say it's important because you know what? Not only many people interact with Mastercard and so forth, but also there are lots of organizations that have credit as part of their offering. So you look at somebody like WW Grainger, the industrial distributor. Their ability to give credit to their customers is a big part of their value proposition. So if they can improve that by 20% on average, that's just outstanding.
Great. Anyone have a quabble with that or thoughts, or are we going important?
Important.
All right, we will move on to the next one. So now this is actually kind of was part of the Executive AI Act, but I guess they are now acting on some of that. So this is an announcement that the government is introducing a bill designed to address the environmental impacts that this huge increase in using AI could have. In reading it, it said that it was going to be voluntary to report on, which I was a little disappointed and surprised at. But let's get the thoughts of others. I believe, Tim, we were going to go to you first on this.
Yep. It's important at a societal level, but probably optional for the day-to-day harried AI executive. We can go down the rabbit hole of the larger issue of environmental impacts and climate change, or where were these people when cryptocurrency was chewing up more energy than Austria? But these things chew up a lot of energy. There's compute power. People think that computers don't use a lot of energy, but this much compute power uses a lot of energy. And so making sure at least as much as possible that energy is renewable and not contributing to further damage to the environment is probably a good thing. But from day to day, as you said, it's voluntary. It's all speculation right now. So as a citizen of society, important; as a executive making business decisions, optional.
I'm actually going to debate that. As you know, this is a topic of my research, and I'm actually speaking about this next week in France. I'm going to elevate important for the AI leader, and here's why. This falls under scope 3 emissions for companies. If you're going to use this, use AI through the cloud, basically, it could be scope 2 or 1 if you're doing it on premises. And there's mandates are coming to report on scope 1 to 3 usage. So the AI leader is going to have to figure out how they're going to measure this and report this at some point. So that is why I would elevate it to important. So who's going to break this tie?
Well, I'll jump in. Someone who spent 5 years in corporate carbon accounting, I think you're right that someone's going to have to report it, but it's not going to be the AI leader. It's someone over in the ESG group that's going to have to deal with the scope 3. And so
well, my argument will be, where are they going to get the data from, right? Like the AI leader is going to have his team use the tools that exist today, which hopefully will be standardized in how they measure.
Well, but he's going to have to measure the tools for all electricity use that all their IT systems use, not just the AI ones. Right. So he'll go to the CTO and.
Yeah. So Paul, you would vote optional. I would actually do think highlighting it as important might be worth it, because think of it as a tax. And even though it wouldn't be directly, the AI leader wouldn't be directly affected, but somebody will be doing the tax report for him or her, but it's still there, and it's still something that you need to reduce over time and watch for tools that would enable that reduction. So in essence, it's on the AI leader's scope of responsibilities over time. And even though it's iffy-washy, not quite clear when it's going to happen, but it is something important, I think, for them to know that it's coming.
I'd say optional. I waver us back just because nothing's in place yet. So the fuel or the iron to the fire isn't quite there just yet. So I'm team optional.
It is there because the act. Right now, people are having to get their reports together to report on last year for this year, I believe, or it's this year to last year. This year, they have to report next year, but it's on the radar.
For volunteer reporting, though.
Yeah.
No,
so I think they made it mandatory.
The report is not going to be voluntary any longer. So,
well, David, drive it to conclusion. Let's keep moving here.
I'm going to defer to the majority, which was optional, but you're giving me good fodder for my talk. Okay, so we're going to just group a bunch of announcements together because Google has announced several different new tools, or sometimes tools they already had being integrated in new ways. They've got the music creation tool. They have got the image generator, which is now going to be integrated into search. Also, they're integrating generative AI into Google Maps. And what was the last one? Oh, Gemini Pro is now going into barred in all regions. So our guest, Connor, will kick us off on this one.
Yeah, thanks. Gosh, this David, you gave me a tough one right off the bat. First of all, one kind of quick comment on the Mastercard one. I think it's fascinating. I always think that the underlying tech is more interesting almost than the story itself, and the behavior tracking that Mastercard is putting forward, just because it's going to be have such huge implications for their bottom line, is of course the main story. But like, they must be creating some killer behavior tracking, which I think is going to have much broader and expansive implications than just from Mastercard. But anyway, that aside, it's like I just always think like it's just like with the R1, the rabbit, about how like the underlying LAM, like large action model, is more interesting than the tool itself. Anyway, that's inside.
Yeah, Connor, on that, the thing that was going through my mind, I don't know if you've seen Minority Report, but it's the Bureau of Pre-Crime, right? I mean, what the hell?
But that's John. That's exactly what I thought when I saw that. When I read the article, I was like, forget the 300%. Like, how are they predicting people's behaviors? Like, that's what I want to know, right? So, anyway, I thought that was super fascinating. The Google stuff, guys, I don't know. You tell me, right? Because Google gives me fits. I go back and forth on Google. Every time Google has something, I'm like, great. And then they disappoint me every time. I'm never going to bet against Google. But let me say this, just sort of tracking along with this. I'm not a big music guy. David, I know you're in a band and everything like that, so don't be disappointed. But I would say on the music front, I tested it out. It sort of had mixed results, but for me as a non-music guy, I was like, this is pretty awesome. 70 seconds of like sad bluegrass or something. Like, it actually gave me something that was pretty good. On the FX thing, which is sort of the lyric generation tool, it just kind of feels a little bit like a large language model that you can put together. But I'll say that it gave some like pretty phenomenal like little moments. Like, I think I was asking you to talk about like balloons, and I put in like balloon into this FX like lyric creator thing, and it was like, and it gave me a few random ones, but then it gave me one that was I think it called like balloons are a gateway drug to littering. And my dad is a poet, and as a writer myself, I'm like, that's a great line. I don't even know what it means, but it's a great line. So, but more importantly though, on this, like, I tested out the AI image generator. It's good. What it does well is it does lettering very well, which I was really impressed by. But otherwise, it's pretty much on par with DALL-E and everything else. So I'm like, okay, so Google's caught up with this. And then Gemini Pro, forget Gemini Pro going into a lot of languages. I can't get Gemini Pro to do anything for me to begin with. Gemini Pro drives me bonkers. So I guess I would rate this as really interesting, like here they come, but at the same time, almost optional, because like I don't see this breaking any ground. I see it almost like catching up. I'm happy to be disproven on that. I'm just not seeing it.
All right.
I agree. I think Google's playing catch up. This is an example right here. It's mostly just announcements of things that they've done that are getting them closer, still not even caught up, but at least closer to what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, Tim, I think it's catch up and not even close to leapfrogging. So they're just
It's
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Oh, go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, thanks, David. Good evening from Melbourne. I think precisely to your point, Paul, that's why I would say it's important. People need to understand just how competitive the market is, and how, to your point, Connor, how it's a lot of flash, but it doesn't seem to have the substance yet, right? And I think it's actually important for our leaders to be aware of that, and our opinion that this isn't actually news is the important news.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and seeing them integrate it into search as they have is kind of like, I mean, maybe it's just a step at this point, and they have bigger plans later to recreate or reinvent, what search is, because other players are already reinventing that experience. So I'm not sure, thinking, well, people already use Google, we're going to throw it in there and just kind of like make that supercharged, is really going to be a good long-term strategy for their viability.
Yeah.
So,
David, one thing that is frustrating on these for the AI leaders is one of the companies we're working to support has 7,000 employees globally, and they're a Google workshop or Google workspace shop. And they just want their employees to be able to use all these tools to look at their own emails and everything. And all these announcements just cause more employee confusion. So it's not helping the AI leader who is a workshop or Google workspace client at all.
That's a great point.
That's interesting. I was going exactly the opposite way with that very thing. That if I'm a Google shop, this gives me body armor to push back on the Microsoft rep. It's like, yeah, give Google a little time. They'll catch up. They'll have all the same function. Leave me alone. So.
All right, so maybe we will mark this as, I like Adam's take, that we'll mark this as important, but not for the reason that you think. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about this report, which I'll tell you from a head of content person, this report makes me cringe of how ugly it is. However, it does have
functional, David. It's functional.
I know, but and it was written by researchers, so I shouldn't be surprised. But where's their comms people picking this up and like enhancing it? I don't know, but it's got a lot of really interesting information, and it kind of just snuck in. I don't remember this getting a lot of like fanfare at the end of last year. So I know a lot of you had found it and found it interesting. So we wanted to call it to everyone's attention and just kind of like go around the horn, and there's a lot of interesting insights here, and see what folks pulled out of it and what we can highlight for the AI leader. And I know, Luda, you were particularly into this. So let's start with you and hear what your takeaway was on this one.
Actually, I only highlighted 2 pages out of all these 41 pages. The first one that caught my attention was on page 39, I believe. And this is to the debate. Yeah, it's page 39. So this is to the debate about the eliminating the jobs with AI. And it's very limited. It's hard to really fight it. And it's the debate about augmentation versus substitution, right? That we hear a lot about. So this page reframes this debate or suggests a different angle. And I'm all for innovation. So it's innovation versus automation is the framework that they suggest. And they support it with the prior technology waves that say, look at, there was certainly job loss, right? But it's a small amount of it. And then there was a lot of innovation based on the new technology, and it created a whole bunch of jobs. So I love this reframing, and that's what caught my eye in this report. That's probably one. Maybe other people can bear on that or interested in that.
Yeah, no, it's funny, David, when you said it was written by researchers. One time I was faculty meeting at Harvard Business School, and Ted Levitt, who was running the Harvard Business Review at the time, got up and he said, when you think about what happens to somebody when they come out of school and then they become a professor, they basically write for a more and more narrow audience. And then you look at executives, the higher they get up in organizations, the less they read. So he said, in the Harvard Business Review, ladies and gentlemen, we have a magazine written by people who can't write for people who won't read. Anyway, I thought it was not a bad kind of lit review, with illustration. I agree with you, format wise is ugly. But I think to any of the AI leaders, I think this is helpful as a compendium of different ways of thinking about it. And they did go back a little bit into the 70s and so forth, because there's a lot of stuff on decision support systems and human computer interaction that they do. They don't go back deep enough. There's a wonderful article. It talks about the legitimacy of automation and who should get the benefits, and it looks at, all the way back to Karl Marx and so forth. And so this is very boosterish in terms of what research they suggest to pull up, but it's pretty well done from a functional standpoint and what you would expect from a vendor trying to push forward.
So David, another one that caught my eye is on page 18. And this was interesting because I didn't think about it. And it's about, from that perspective, it's about metacognition. So
page 19, I think, actually.
Oh, 19. Okay, sorry.
Got it. Thanks.
So it talks, is it?
Yeah, metacognition is at the top.
Metacognition, right. So it claims with some supporting articles that it actually is easy to work with with suggestive generative AI systems. And you have to have self-awareness and be able to carry your own. Interesting thought. I haven't thought about it this way before. So it's not for soft-hearted, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, as John said, this is an interesting overall report. They are talking their book to a certain extent. It's a Microsoft research report. Mm-hmm. This one is interesting. Again, as John said, they could probably do a little more research. This was what Seymour Papert and Marvin Minsky were all about way back when, which and Marvin had the great joke. Marvin and Seymour founded the AI lab at MIT, and Marvin had the great joke of not a joke, but the one-liner of, does the computer program the kid program the computer, or the computer program the kid? And of course, the answer is yes. So having to explicitly write out what you're thinking changes your thinking. And this is one of the things that's been known for a long time. So it's interesting. And that's, people talk about co-pilots, partners, collaborators. This is what they're getting at here, is that it's actually changing the way you think about the world. So it's pretty interesting.
But Tim, at a high level, is this any different than a knowledge worker using Office Suite or a software coder learning a language? It's just up a level with a new set of tools.
You could argue it's not different in form, but it's different in kind. That is, it's one thing to use a tool to make you more productive in writing an article. It's another thing to have a collaborator that is changing the fundamental content of the article itself. That is having you think harder about what the article is actually about.
Yeah. And they talk all the hard things like, who really owned all the IP that, they train the stuff on, and, who should get the economic value when I sit down and suck your brain and put it into a machine, like all the ownership and economic rent stuff. There's no Karl Marx in the middle of this thing yet, but we'll probably get one. There's no thinking at all about societal implications, the proper appropriation of property, what property means in the context of this, all that stuff. And to Tim's point, it's, I don't know if you ever seen the movie The Devil Wears Prada, but she talks to the the grad who thinks that high fashion is nothing, and she takes her through how the the cerulean sweater that she's wearing has to do with a high fashion thing before. Same thing here. These people don't know where a lot of these ideas came from, and at least it went a little bit farther back into the pile.
I just had one comment too on this, just at a high level, some of the pages I looked at, and it talked about code interpreter. And so again, making data analysis accessible. And so that was on slide 27. And so I find it interesting. We keep seeing this push about how it's helping with building of code and things like that. So it's that whole debate again, is the data scientist going to go away? And so I think sometimes with LLMs, we don't necessarily think of it in that way. We think of it as like summarization for unstructured data or documents. So I find it interesting when we keep seeing that push about the whole working with code and in the data science realm, algorithm building and things like that, almost like the algorithm building the algorithm kind of thing. So I just wanted to kind of showcase that as well.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I want to showcase, we just dropped a link in the chat. Adam, I believe, has built a little tool that will help you, GPT, that you can use to interrogate this document. And Adam, I know you're hidden down there today. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah. Thanks, David. So I would rate this as important, but I wouldn't recommend that people read it. I'd recommend they go interrogate my GPT and ask it about how it's relevant to them. So what I actually did is I went to my GPT before the call, and I asked for deeply insightful observations that I can make about the report that would demonstrate my understanding of broader context with regards to emerging technologies. And props to everyone. You've already hit on both of the things it gave me. One of them was the metacognition, right? And it defined it as being conscious of how one interacts with and responds to technology. But also importantly, and Connor, I know you hammer this home a lot on your calls and your videos, is the ability to critically evaluate the output, right? And that's the importance of the metacognition. And the other one we've touched on, but I haven't heard anyone use the term yet, is sociotechnical dynamics.
Yes.
And this implies that there's a reciprocal influence where people shape the technology just as much as the technology shapes them. And what you were describing there about how even through the process of learning, you're changing the process, that really hits home on both of those. So it's fascinating. It's interesting. I wouldn't recommend people read the whole report.
Yeah, Adam, that's such a good way to say it, Adam. And it's the thing, like, so just real quick, my take on this, like, this report drove me absolutely bonkers. Like, I mean, David, first, like, I'm with you, like, make something that's like nice and readable, but more importantly to it, and this is probably just my bend and my leaning on everything that has to do with generative AI. Like, I don't really get that. I think there's some interesting stuff in this report. I don't get it. Like, it's quoting, like, who was it? It was like, Noy and Zhang or whatever. I think it was like that MIT report from like spring of 2023, when that's all we had in terms of productivity. And then it's talking about, like, typos will change this and an extra space will change. That is not the case anymore. And like, the thing that drives me crazy, this is why, like, I'm not a big fan of, hey, how did we get here? I don't put those slides in. I don't talk about it, only because I think it throws people off. This stuff changes so fast that when we're talking about how large language models are optimized and how to best use ChatGPT and things like that, people are still stuck back in, like, when they first heard about it, right? They're stuck back in April of 2023. It's like, well, I heard it, I can't use it, it hallucinates. I talk to companies all the time. And here's the thing, like, the variance of people saying, well, I can't do it because it does this. I'm like, that was 6 months ago. Like, it has changed. Like, if I did this presentation 6 days ago, I'd be doing a different presentation. So the fact that Microsoft is putting out a report and putting out all this stuff, I'm reading it as like, this is fact. This is how this works. Maybe I'm reading it wrong, but there's so many other future of work studies out there, like a billion of them, PwC and Salesforce and AWS. They all have, and LinkedIn, they all have great future of work studies. This one is like, and I get that this is like a history of research as we got here. I think a history of research over the last year of LLMs putting it out is a very dangerous thing to do, because people reading this will think that this is what is happening now, and it is not. So I get that there's interesting stuff in here, but to me, this is sort of like, this sets people back if they, I love Adam's idea of like going in there and figuring it out, by asking it, by querying it. But otherwise, it drove me nuts.
You already know what drove me nuts, but maybe, to your point, Connor, like, this got released quietly, right? So it feels like one of those internal struggles where the researchers, like, and I've been down this road, right, as a content person, the researchers came out and said, we created this, like, awesome piece of research and we want to put it out there. And, like, the, comms people were kind of like, I don't know about this one. And they just kind of, like, you just quietly, like, put it up online and you just don't say anything about it. And then you say to the researchers, look, we launched it.
Hey, David, if I can jump in one more time, I'll double down on what Connor's saying there. Like, it's important to emphasize that in this day and age, as fast as this is moving, people should just assume that if it's written down, it's already out of date, right? Yes. And this is from last year, guys. We're almost 10% of the way through 2024 already. So just bear that in mind as you look at the information.
I agree for about that in terms of the the capability and function and so forth. In terms of the backdrop of, okay, who's going to get the value from this and what responsibilities and what property looks like, I think we actually have to go before the 1980s, because that was the last time when you said sociotechnic, Adam, there's the Tavistock Institute in the 60s and 70s did a whole thing about sociotechnic design. And they believe that the workers should co-design the environment with capital and management. That's not what's going on here. This is complete Taylorism, where management and capital own the workplace and you will do what you are told. And I think it's time to bring back that conversation, because this is going to have such a profound effect on who gets the economic returns.
Connor, I thought of you when I saw the prompt engineering section. And then I also thought of you with that. One thing we didn't talk about with Google is they kind of stuck this in there is, they're giving you more menus for prompts to try to help people make effective prompts. There's still such a big difference between the answers you're going to get with various prompts with, like, very little variation and variations in ways that you wouldn't think would change the answer. And I know that you're training people, and also just wanted to let you share, because you made a big announcement yesterday, what you have launched.
Oh, thanks. Thank you for that. Yeah, so yesterday I launched AI Mindset, which has been sort of my quiet training program for a long time. It's a framework that I built to train companies and individuals on generative AI. So I put out a newsletter. Guys, you guys know the newsletter route. Like, it's a beast to put it out, but also we launched a big website and a big resource guide and all that kind of stuff. And we'll be doing courses. I track along closely with what you guys do as well. There's just like, there's so much need for that. But like, yeah, my bend on it is a little, it's maybe a little different. It's kind of just in general, in that, like, I used to teach generative AI in one way, where I would like teach the tool. Here's a 3-part framework on the tool. And what I was finding over and over again was that companies, hedge funds and asset management places that I was working with, it just wasn't really sticking, and they were changing small parts of their organization, but not the whole thing. And so I tossed out that framework, which was very painful as a business school. John, you know this, right? Like, just sort of like build in business school, you build a framework at NYU Stern, you're like, this is going to be the best thing ever. And then it worked, but it didn't do what I wanted it to do. So I rebuilt a framework based on how we think and how we work, rather than the tool itself.
Cool.
But I mean, but this is like, this is sort of, it goes to all this point that you're talking about, David. Like, it's like, you see sort of like little things on Google and all that kind of stuff. You're like, yeah, that's getting closer to thinking like, and mimicking how our brains think. Forget about neural networks, but literally like what people want to come and see on this tool. And I thought Google is actually, and to give them kudos on that, I think that those prompts that they're giving are actually the best out there at the moment, but we're still very far away.
All right. Well, this was a really great discussion today, and Connor, it was so cool to have you. And yeah, we hope you'll come back again.
For sure.
Good luck with the launch. That sounds fabulous.
Thank you, congrats on that. I know that's just like a huge lift. Paul, did you have any announcements you wanted to close the day, or?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so closing the week. So we had a fabulous webinar on Wednesday with 725 people who registered. MIT walked through how they use no-code software to create 3 chatbots in less than 2 weeks for less than a couple $100. So it's a great use case that's in production for using RAG at certain use cases. This one, information is not confidential, and I encourage people to look at the recording of that. And as usual, Monday nights we'll have our learning lab, and this week we're going to be focusing on new tips for using Gen AI in the sales process. So,
all right, very good. Everybody have a good weekend, and we will see you Monday.
Yeah.
Happy Friday.